Does anybody know that I'm Larry Stimpert? But I'm pleased to welcome you all to this first evening of our symposium. I want to thank everyone for coming. I have to publicly acknowledge all of those who made this possible. I say this often. I'm often showing up at events that other people have done incredible work to make possible. And I just get to show up and revel in all that great work. But I'd be remiss if I didn't acknowledge Caroline Emmons, who's been a prime mover. She and Tommy Shomo have co-chaired our 250th anniversary committee, along with Eugene Hickok, one of our trustees. But Caroline, so many of the ideas the symposium, so many of the other ideas that are in our 250th anniversary celebration are Caroline's. We were talking tonight at the dinner about the archaeological dig, and this is something you've been wanting to do and been a prime mover for that so long. And then, of course, the pamphlet project, getting your colleagues organized, actually getting it done, really heroic. And again, you've spearheaded so many of the efforts. So really, thank you so much for your leadership. And thank you also to everyone else who's been so involved in making this 250th anniversary so special for the college. I was asked to give some introductory remarks on this first night of the symposium, and what I wanted to speak about are the three essential ideas that animated the founding of the college. This whole year is about the founding of the college and our 250-year history and legacy. But I thought let's zero in tonight on what I think are three really essential ideas behind the founding of the college. The first is the idea of freedom. And this was not only the animating force behind the founding of the college, but certainly the founding of our country, which occurred at the same time. It's remarkable that we're named for two of the foremost champions of representative government in the history of humankind. We can easily take our freedoms for granted, but I think it's important to recognize at the time of the founding, nothing was to be taken for granted. There's a wonderful line in the Union it's actually in the Philanthropic Society's constitution. At one time, those two organizations, there were two separate organizations that merged, but in the Philanthropic Constitution, there's a wonderful line, freedom of discussion, and it says it was bought with precious blood. It was still very much in the minds of these students in the early 1800s that a war had been fought for them to have the freedom of discussion. And again, that was something that I think is a big part. What I don't know, I think some faculty know this, but in the bylaws of the college, it's still there, is the expectation that our faculty will swear allegiance to the glorious revolution. And so again, it was taken very, very seriously at the time of the founding of the college. The second essential idea, I think, was the idea of freedom, of virtue. And our founders were very much liberally educated people. And they had studied history. And they knew that an experiment in representative government, the experiment in creating a republic, had rarely succeeded in history. But the other thing that they knew is that when it had succeeded, the essential ingredient for it to succeed was virtue. And I think there's some quotes that really capture this really well. There's a famous letter that John Adams wrote in April of 1776, right before the Declaration of Independence. He says, "Public virtue cannot exist in a nation without private virtue. And public virtue is the only foundation of republics." And then I think most people know, especially here at Hampden-Sydney where we emphasize history, most people know that when Benjamin Franklin emerged from the Constitutional Convention, he had that great line, "What kind of government have you given us?" And he said, "A republic if you can keep it." But what's also, I think, important to know is that as he emerged from that Constitutional Convention, he said that only a virtuous people are capable of freedom. So I don't think that we can, underestimate the importance that our founders of the college, the founders of our country, had for this virtue as an essential ingredient if we're going to be a free people. The third thing that I think is an essential idea that we should always be reminded of, and certainly a key idea in the founding of the college, was that virtue can be learned. Virtue, for our founders, virtues today, it's not a trait. It's not like having blue eyes or brown eyes. You're not born with it. It's not like height, where it's predetermined by genetics, how tall or how short you're going to be in life. But it's something that can be acquired, and this is just really, really key. That's why we have the mission that we have, to form good men and good citizens. Very much a belief that this is something that could be acquired through study, through learning. And that's why our college in particular, but other colleges were also informed to instill this idea of virtue in their students. I think it's uncanny. It's one of those things that I've come to call the Hampden-Sydney 6 degrees of separation. Not long after Samuel Stanhope Smith wrote the advertisement where he said, "We're forming this college to form good men and good citizens," John Adams wrote a letter to his son, John Quincy, who was studying at Harvard at the time. And he said, "You will ever remember that the purpose of your education is to make you a good man and a useful citizen." Totally uncanny. I mean, I can't believe he would have read Samuel Stanhope Smith's advertisement. But this idea of forming young men into virtuous men was really, really canny. So with that brief overview of what was animating the founding of the college, it's great to welcome you to this symposium. And again, thank you to all who have participated. It's now my pleasure to introduce John Coombs, who's going to introduce tonight's speaker.
Good evening. I am Professor John Coombs, a professor in the history department here at Hampden-Sydney. And it is my pleasure to introduce this evening's speaker, Professor, or I should say now, Dr. Alan Taylor. Until last year, the Thomas Jefferson Foundation Chair at the Department of History at the University of Virginia, who I'm sure is now enjoying his emeritus status. At least I hope you are. Professor Taylor is an amazingly accomplished scholar. He's published 11 books, including William Cooper's Town, Power and Persuasion on the Frontier of the Early Republic, which I remember very fondly from my graduate school days. It was published in 1995, which was awarded the Bancroft Prize, the Beveridge Family Prize, and the Pulitzer Prize. He also is the author of The Internal Enemy, Slavery and War in Virginia, published in 2013, which also won the Pulitzer Prize, as well as the Merle Curdy Prize for Social History, and American Revolutions, A Continental History, 1750 to 1804, published in 2016. Please give a warm welcome to the Hill to Dr. Alan Taylor.
Thank you, John, for that kind introduction. I'm off to a good start. I didn't trip over the wire either. It's nice to be at a place that honors Algernon Sidney and John Hampden. Many years ago, I was at the Huntington Library in Southern California, and the director of research there, the former one, he retired, was Martin Ridge. And he took his Puritan descent very seriously. And I didn't realize this until there was a social occasion where he invited a group of the fellows over to his house. And you're sitting down there and you're having a drink and so forth. And then he presents something called the Death Book. And he expected all his guests to sign it. And you were replicating that you were signing the death warrant for Charles I. So I guess royalists were not welcome with him. So I'm going to be talking about people who also rejected monarchy, which is the American revolutionaries. And so we began with my recent employer, Thomas Jefferson, and he's going to be the central figure in the story that I'm going to tell tonight. But in Jefferson, it's always tough to see. He's such an idiosyncratic person, and yet he speaks so powerfully about issues that many other people were also engaged with. The revolutionaries were not just creating an independent country. They're creating a new culture. They're creating a republic. But a republic is not just some government that's detached from its citizens. It's a government of the citizens. And so unless there is just the right culture, the republic will fail. That was a widespread conviction. Now, Jefferson cared about education throughout his life, and indeed, the oldest surviving letter that we have, written by Thomas Jefferson, is written when he's a young man in 1760, so he's 17 years old. And he is, his father's died, and he's writing to the executors of his family will. Because he doesn't have any control over the money. He hasn't inherited it yet because he's not 21. So he's asking them for permission to go to the College of William and Mary, which in 1760s, before Hampden-Sydney's founded, indeed there's the only college south of Princeton in the whole colonies. So he wants to go to the College of William and Mary, and he's doing a sales pitch, and he's basically saying this, that if I go to college, I'll party less. And he's the first and last American young man to say this. Now, this seemed reasonably persuasive because he was allowed to go off to William and Mary. He didn't stay there very long. At that time, there was essentially one building, which they call the Wren Building. There are two support buildings, the Brafferton and the President's House. But then this is the so-called Wren Building, and this is where the classrooms were, this is where the students lived, this is where the faculty lived, and mostly pretty unhappily by all parties. So Jefferson, the professors all had to be Anglicans, and we heard from John Ragosta about what a powerful thing that was in the colonial culture of Virginia. And William and Mary, the students there, are expected to go to chapel every day, and it's Anglican chapel. And this drove Jefferson crazy, and it's part of the reason why he wants to design a culture for Virginia that will shed this Anglican reverence for tradition. Now, just rough outline here. What difference does it make if you go from a monarchy to a republic? Well, who is sovereign in a monarchy? It's the monarch. It's the one person who has inherited the throne. But in a republic, the sovereign is something called the people. Now, in a monarchy, the common people have to be passive, and they are called subjects. They're subject to the authority of the monarch. But in a republic, the people, at least those who have full civil rights, meaning at that time white men with some property, they're citizens and they are expected to be active because they choose the people who will rule the state, the country. So if this is the case, what does this mean for the culture that you need? And I love this image because it gets visually right to the heart of what early Americans thought they were doing. You see, it's a sailor. He's holding the American flag. There's Lady Liberty behind him, offering him a wreath, in other words, celebrating him, and holding a liberty cap behind her. And if you look under the sailor's feet, you see he is trampling on chains and a crown. So the Republican culture of America is understood as the polar opposite of the culture of monarchy. And the slogan below, which has been chopped off a little bit in this image, says, "We owe allegiance to no crown." Now, this guy, you can see he's very well dressed, and he's King George III. Okay. And King George III was the last king of America, and he remains king of the United Kingdom until his death in 1820. George III is the sovereign, and sovereigns of the 18th century presented themselves in this style. The whole notion was that you dazzled the people with the ceremonies, the performance, the dress of majesty. And you expected people to be deferential and to be awed by this presentation. Now, you can't do that in a republic. You don't want to do that in a republic. You don't want your citizens to be passive. You want them to be active. Now, the other great nightmare, then, of the revolutionaries is they want to create free government. But the pathology that they feared would erupt within their society would be the elevation of a leader who would be a demagogue. And a demagogue was somebody who would pander to prejudices, to passions, rather than the reason of the people, and would get himself put into power so that he could exploit power and to destroy the republic from within. And they had two men in mind that they knew from history who were negative reference points for them that come up early and often. On the left, he's probably more familiar to you. That's Julius Caesar, who more than anyone else had destroyed the Roman Republic. And on the right is Oliver Cromwell, who had ended up subverting the English Republic, founded out of the Revolution in the 1640s and early 1650s. Both of them are military men who had seized power, both of them charismatic men and very able speakers. So they were held up as these were demagogues who destroyed previous republics. And we can't let that happen in this country. And the solution is to educate the people. Benjamin Rush, who's one of the founding fathers, says this: if the common people are ignorant and vicious, a republican nation can never long be free. It's ignorance that allows the triumph of the demagogue as they saw it. And you've heard a lot about virtue. You heard it from President Stimpert, and you've also heard it from the presentation with John Ragosta earlier, and it is the theme of this symposium. Virtue was understood to be the essential quality that the American people had to have if they're to preserve their republic. Well, what does virtue mean? To boil it down to its simplest elements, as understood by the founders. And by founders, I mean not just the handful of men who were either at the Constitution Convention or the Declaration of Independence, but the broader generation of leaders throughout the country, is that it is setting aside your self-interest to pursue the common good, to know the difference between your self-interest and the common good. It is not innate to human nature. And none of the good Protestants who were the predominant element in the population of the United States at its founding had any notion that humans were innately good. Certainly the Presbyterians did not regard people as innately good. They are great believers in original sin. And they carry this thought into politics, which is not that we're creating a government in which we assume that people are innately good, but we're assuming a government in which people can become good, that they can learn virtue. Virtue is not born into people, it is learned, it's taught. So, Benjamin Rush also created this thing, which is a moral and political thermometer. And you can tell where you are in your virtue by what you drink. So I'm kind of in the middle of the pack there because I prefer strong beer. So I'm not the most virtuous person in this room. If I were really virtuous, I would just be drinking water or milk, which is at the top of the thermometer you can see. Now, if any of you, however, are starting your day with a daily dram, which puts you down there at the bottom, you have a very grim future ahead of you, as you will see there. Now, Jefferson echoes what Rush says. I mean, you can find just about all of the founders will say some variant of the same thing. You can find John Adams saying it. You can find James Madison saying it. It is universal that you need good education to prepare virtuous citizens, and you need that to keep the republic, to preserve it from demagogues or sliding back into monarchy. So Jefferson proposes a system. You heard from John earlier that in 1779 he's trying to get Virginia to get rid of its establishment fully, its religious establishment. He's also at the same time, and it's part of the same conceptual package for him. He wants to get rid of the established church, but he also, at the same time, he wants Virginians to be better educated so they can become better citizens of this new republic. And he sets up this three-tier system as he's proposing it to the legislature. At the base of society, there would be local wards. He wanted to subdivide Virginia into these township-sized units that he called wards, or hundreds. Now, New England was subdivided already into all of these towns, and that's maybe the only thing he admired about New England, was this township system. Because Jefferson really disliked county governments of Virginia. He saw them as oligarchies that were self-perpetuating and selfish people. And so he wanted to bring government closer to more people by creating all of these wards that would function like a New England town. And the chief business of the ward would be to run a school, a local school, a grammar school. And that grammar school would be supported by taxes levied within that particular ward. And the grammar school would last for 3 years, and it would be open to all white boys and girls. Now, 40% of the population of Virginia was non-white. They were held in slavery. But Jefferson is not proposing to educate them, and had he proposed it, it would have gone absolutely nowhere in the Virginia of 1779. And then the next stage up, so this would be a free education in terms of families aren't paying tuition for this, but they would be paying a tax, but this tax would be paid by everybody who lived within the ward, not just the people sending their kids to school. So this is important to note. There was no public education system at all in Virginia. There was no public education system at all except for in a few New England states. Schools were private. And a lot of people didn't go to school. The literacy rate for white people in Virginia was probably about 60%, whereas in New England it's about 90%. So people were broadly better educated in New England than they were anywhere else in the new country. And Jefferson wants to bring the literacy rate, the political literacy as well as the basic literacy rate up in Virginia through these schools, these ward schools. Now then he would have what he called 24 colleges. Sometimes he calls them academies. And they're the equivalent of high schools, private high schools. There would only be 24 of them. And Virginia is the biggest state in the country at that time. So not every county would have one. And there, most of the students would be people who paid tuition. So these are going to be much more selective. But he also wanted there to be charity scholarships for one boy annually from each ward school to go to the college closest to him. But only white boys. So no girls would go on to college in Jefferson's scheme. Then stage 3, the capstone of it, is one university. And for reasons that I touched upon, he does not want that university to be the College of William and Mary. Now in 1779, he's still open to that possibility, but within the next 20 years, he's going to decide Virginia needs a new university. And preferably where he could see it from a telescope. And there the college would be just a very small portion, the white male population of Virginia would be educated there. So from a modern perspective, this is an elitist system that he's proposing. And the goal of this, often when we talk about education today, about what the goal of it is, we describe it in economic terms. It's going to get you a better job, or it's going to promote economic development, or it's going to advance research in some important science field. And Jefferson and his cohort of people think the purpose of education is political. It's to prepare citizens, first and foremost. And he thinks one of the secondary benefits of his proposed system is that people would have to participate in these very local governments called the wards, and that would give them a better experience of democracy than they'd ever had before in Virginia. And this again speaks to Jefferson's conception of he wants there to be social mobility, but you can see that it's a rather narrow filter that you get through. And that he thinks of the great mass of Virginians as, in effect, not prepared for this. But he's hoping that through this filtration system, you will get a very well-educated people to lead Virginia. And Jefferson spoke of Virginia as Virginia is my nation. He's first and foremost a Virginian and very distantly an American. And again, that's not unique to him. Now, what happens to his plan? 1779, the legislators say, great, Thomas Jefferson, great plan, but we don't have the money for this. And we don't have the political will for it any more than they had the will to completely disestablish the Anglican Church at that particular time. So it goes nowhere. They don't exactly kill it, but they table it. Say it's going to wait until after the war. Well, they waited a very long time after the war until they took it up again. They take it up in 1796, and then they pass a bill that says, we recommend it to all the counties of Virginia. And there were 96 counties in Virginia at that time. Do you know how many of them adopted it? One, Norfolk County. But they changed their mind 3 years later. And they're only adopting the lowest level, the ward school system. So the ward school system got adopted for 3 years. None of the colleges got set up. The university would not be set up for many years thereafter. So twice, Jefferson's system was carefully considered by the legislature, and they punted both times. So what is the reason why you've got these very eloquent men like Benjamin Rush and Thomas Jefferson on, saying education is essential to good citizenry, citizenry is essential to a republic. People did value the republic, and they will not pay for it, however. It comes down to who's going to pay for this educational system. John spoke about how the parish tax was the highest tax paid by colonial Virginians, and it was. And part of the thing that that tax covered was not just poor relief, but it also provided some education. Because about the only schools that existed were run by the Anglican minister in each parish. That got basically wiped out by disestablishment. The tax got wiped out. Jefferson's hoping that instead people will pay a tax toward a more secular educational system, and it turns out they'd rather keep the money in their pockets. And Jefferson is really upset about this. And he's saying, this is what's at stake, free government. You think that this is an expensive cost for education. Well, it's going to be much more expensive if you end up being ruled by kings, priests, and nobles. And he primarily blamed the colonial elites of the counties. He said they're really the ones that blocked this because they were selfish. But other politicians in Virginia say that's a little too simplistic. One of them is John Tyler Sr. He's the father of the later president. And he said, this is basically because there's a broad aversion to paying taxes. It's not just the county elites. It's all these small farmers. They don't want to pay taxes either. So Tyler believes that a better education is the foundation of free government, but the people who are currently in the free government don't want to pay for it. And then there's David Watson. David Watson's a legislator. He's from Louisa County, and he supported adopting Jefferson's educational plan. He supported having counties pay for this. But he wrote a satirical essay which is basically saying that people prefer consumer goods over education. But he's saying if people don't, in fact, invest in education, they're going to lose their ability to buy these consumer goods because they will be dominated by an aristocracy. And then there's this North Carolina farmer, put it most vividly. College-learned persons give themselves great airs, are proud, and the fewer of them we have amongst us, the better. Who wants Latin and Greek and abstruse mathematics at times like this in a country like this? This is a pretty common sentiment among common citizens at that time. So just to recapitulate, there are these 2 points where the state of Virginia considered an educational system, and both times they balked because of the cost, because their constituents didn't want to pay for it. Jefferson focuses in on the county oligarchs as exclusively to blame, but other Virginia politicians can see that there is a broader resistance to the cost of this system. Now, this will be revived in the literary fund debate in the legislature of 1816 to 1818. And what the literary fund is, some Virginians got the idea, okay, we have to kind of hide the tax. There are various fines that are paid to the state. Let's just put them in a literary fund, and then people don't regard it as a tax. And that'll be the literary fund. The problem with it is there's not a lot of money there, until there's a potential windfall that comes in after the War of 1812 when the federal government owed Virginia $1.2 million, which was a lot of money then. So there's a member of the legislature, Charles Fenton Mercer from Loudoun County, who says, let's take that $1.2 million and put it in the literary fund. And then we can start to do Jefferson's program. This is Charles Fenton Mercer. Now, Mercer's big problem is that he belongs to the Federalist Party. And you could basically hold the Federalist Party of Virginia in this room. There are almost no legislators who are Federalists. The Federalists are basically the whipping dog to tell voters that you better vote for the Republicans. This is a different Republican Party than today. The Republicans who governed Virginia. And the Republicans were people like Madison and Jefferson and Monroe. So Mercer is this rare Republican in the rare Federalist in the legislature, and his idea is, let's put the money in there. Turns out most of the legislators are game to do that, because the alternative would have been to return it to the voters with tax relief. They decided, okay, good idea. But it turns out even the $1.2 million is not enough to fund all 3 elements of Jefferson's plan. So the question becomes, which of the 3 elements should get priority? The ward schools at the bottom, colleges in the middle, or the university at the top? Okay, so I'm just going to ask you to poll, because we're here in a republic. How many of you would vote for spending the money at the ward level first? Okay, there's a pretty strong majority there. How many of you would favor going to the colleges? A few of you. How many of you say the university should get first priority? 1 of you, okay. 2 of you. I'm not taking the votes up there. That's not very democratic of me. Okay, so you would have sided with Charles Fenton Mercer. Mercer says, yeah, we got to start at the base level. You know, if your concern is really to get an educated citizenry, that's where the citizens are. And this is what Mercer says in the midst of this debate. But do you know who opposed him? Thomas Jefferson. So we simplified Jefferson when we say he's the great Democrat. He's the great man of the common people. I'm not saying anything contrary to that in order to denigrate him, but just to say, Jefferson is a complex package. It's a package deal with Jefferson. And he is as much an elitist as he is a Democrat. And Jefferson says, absolutely not. If there's only enough money to do one of these three things, it's my university. It's very much his university, which he is quite clear, it's not yet been located, but he's going to be quite clear that he's going to move heaven and earth and pull all his political strings to make sure it's in Charlottesville. Do the university first. Okay. So what happens? Well, I think you know there is a University of Virginia, and it gets built in 1826. So these are kind of the two issues that are dividing Charles Fenton Mercer, who is CFM, and TJ. Top priority for Mercer is primary schools, and he wants the state government to levy the taxes to support the system. And he wants there to be a state bureau of education that will regulate the schools. Okay. So he's saying this is the solution. We've been trying to get the counties to do it. The counties won't do it. It will never get established if the counties do it. The state must do it. And Jefferson says, no, no, no. I do want those ward schools to be established, but I want the counties to establish them and fund them, even though that should have been proven to be a complete non-starter by that point. Jefferson does not give up his tenacious ideas easily. So that's one thing why he's not with Mercer. The other thing is Jefferson knows he's an older man and he doesn't have that many years, and he wants to see a tangible result. And the most tangible thing that he could achieve would be the university. And the result is we get the university. The state of Virginia will set up a charity fund to subsidize the poorest white children, poorest white boys, I should say, only, to go to some local schools. That's it. And even that doesn't satisfy Jefferson. He tries to claw that money back so it could go to the university, even though the students at the university would all come from the wealthiest families of Virginia. Okay, now my point again is not that Jefferson's a hypocrite, it's that he sees the world in ways different than we expect him to see the world, given how we have simplified him over time. Jefferson's thinking is this. He powerfully believes that the oligarchs rule Virginia, these county oligarchs. He has every reason to believe that. And he thinks nothing really is going to change until you educate the oligarchs in the principles of the Enlightenment, which Jefferson called science. Science means more than what we mean with science. There's also a science of history, there's a science of law. Any sort of empirical inquiry is done in a systematic way, following rational principles, for Jefferson, is science. And he felt that if the elite of Virginia got an education that he called science, they would then decide that they wanted to do things like establish local schools and adopt gradual emancipation and deport all the enslaved people. So Jefferson's notion is it's the University of Virginia that will be the engine that will create a reformed elite in Virginia, and then that reformed elite will produce the sweeping political, social changes that Jefferson wants. The reality is, the graduates of the University of Virginia wanted to conserve the Society of Virginia, not transform it. Why would they want to transform a society that was working to their benefit? So there would be no public educational system in Virginia until there's a civil war. Thank you. I'm happy to take questions. I'll give the balcony here the first option, since I ignored you before. Right there. Go ahead.
Do you think Jefferson was right to prioritize the elites, the educated, rather than the common people?
Well, my point at the very end was that he wasn't right, because he educated the elites, and it made no difference in transforming society in the ways that he wanted it to be transformed.
So you didn't know the flaw of the system itself, or of the approach to, like, do you know the flaw of the college, the way they designed the college, or of his prioritizing?
Well, we can get into the flaws of how he designed the college, but that will take a while. Jefferson wants a completely secular university. There would be no professor of theology. There would be no chapel. It was the only college or university in America that had no chapel, and no courses at all in theology. So Jefferson has a notion that there was a lot of pushback from other Virginians, including key figure here, John Holt Rice, who was one of the most interesting people of that generation in Virginia. And he engages with Jefferson in this very interesting way. John Holt Rice is a very devout Presbyterian, and he wants the university not to be a super secular place, and to have a place for religion within the university, not to keep religion at arm's length. And he does not succeed as long as Jefferson's alive. When Jefferson dies, one of the chief person who takes over from him in the Board of Visitors is very devoted to religion, particularly to Presbyterianism, and he starts to bring in some changes, and eventually the faculty will be shifted out of the English faculty that Jefferson first recruited, and there will be more Virginians, and eventually religion will take a very prominent role in the school. Now, so there is change within the university in its culture toward a greater religiosity that you find in place by the 1850s. And I argue that that shift is essential to bringing social peace to the college, because it had been a very violent place where students were violent to students and students were violent toward faculty and toward the buildings of the university. It was almost complete chaos much of the time. And people talk about the honor system as what tamed it. Well, what tamed it was the development of a more evangelical Christian culture, and then also the honor system being brought in about that same time. So my point is that there is cultural change that's brought about. It's cultural change different than what Jefferson wanted. Right? The changes that Jefferson wanted, a more democratic society in Virginia, one which expands opportunity for common white Virginians, that educates more common white Virginians, that never happened until after the Civil War. Yes? Yeah, it's good. Another good question. William and Mary was just about dead at that point, for a variety of reasons. One is the capital had been moved out of Williamsburg to Richmond. It's a malarial region. The population growth and the power of Virginia had shifted into the Piedmont. We're in the Piedmont here. So Tidewater is economically decayed, it's got a problem with malaria, it's got a problem with there's no longer investing in the infrastructure there. So William and Mary, and it lost a lot of funding with the revolution. So William and Mary, Jefferson thinks the best thing you can do to William and Mary is kill it. And then take what's left of its endowment and put it in this new university. Now, of course, there's pushback from those people in Tidewater that want to keep William and Mary alive and would like to see if they could revive it. And eventually they will revive it. And they do fend off Jefferson's efforts to kill it. But Jefferson kills their attempt to save themselves by moving to Richmond. Because he knows if they move to Richmond, they can schmooze with the legislators. And the legislators now might favor a revived William and Mary rather than building a University of Virginia. So there is a political struggle there. It's a very one-sided struggle in which William and Mary is going to lose. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, he's saying private colleges do what they will. You know, Hampden-Sydney's not his preferred college, right? But, for example, in his ward school system, he had this notion of that the school boards that would be established, he wanted it a rule that no minister could serve on one. So again, it goes to John's point. Some of these founding fathers are hyper-secular. Not all, but some. And Jefferson is very secular, and how, that doesn't mean, as John pointed out, that he's completely irreligious or that he denigrates religion in the private sphere, but he wants no religion in the public sphere. And that includes in an educational system. But if there's a private college or a private school, they do what they want. Yeah. Yeah. To the average Virginian, it's not very accessible. All schools are private. Now, that doesn't mean they're all elite schools. There is the College of William and Mary, there's what's now Washington and Lee, and there's Hampden-Sydney, and I think that's all in the circa 1800 for colleges. Now, there are a lot of academies around. They're all private. Most of them are quite short-lived. It's hard to find faculty for them that will stay. And then there are a lot of local schools where a group of neighbors would get together and they would build a log cabin and they would hire somebody who was reasonably sober to be the local teacher. But all of the memoirs that deal with having been a student at these schools is about how violently abusive the teachers were, and that in fact they weren't sober, and that you didn't learn very much in there unless you were learning it yourself. So the state of the educational system in Virginia, as throughout the rest of the South, was very poor. Yeah, I'm going to get to you in the back of the room, but I... Well, it's kind of both. You know, there's kind of, it can be pretty hard to know what common white Virginians thought other than what you see in election results. Because we don't have a lot of letters or diaries written by common Virginians that survive. Partly it's the circular thing, is that if you don't have a broad education, we don't have anywhere near the number of letters and diaries from common people that survived from New England in the same period of time. The best we can tell is that your most common Virginians are just focused on getting by, keeping the farm going. And that means most of the year they need the kids working on the farm. And they think they can probably get a basic literacy and numeracy from the parents teaching them something, or maybe they'll send them off to one of these little log schools. And that was good enough for them, so it'll be good enough for the next generation. That seems to be the predominant mode of thinking. Okay, now, there are exceptions, but that's the predominant mode of thinking, as best we can tell. Yeah.
So, you mentioned that there was no public education in America in general, but on a few places in New England. Forgive me if I'm missing this, but how much was Jefferson's system comparable to that?
Well, it's similar to the New England system in the bottom levels. Okay. There isn't any program in any of the New England states that is as comprehensive as Jefferson. There's no public university in New England. There will not be a public university until much later on. This is one of the ironies. All the earliest public universities are all in the South. The primary reason is the states of the South were concerned about their young elite men going off to Princeton, Yale, and Harvard, that they're going to get ideas that are antithetical to Southern society. So the willingness to actually spend some money on education is largely, university education is largely driven by the desire to keep young men at home where they will be in the cultural embrace of Virginia or North Carolina or Georgia or South Carolina. Okay, you're welcome. Yes?
You mentioned that the literacy rate was around 60%.
Among whites.
Because most women, almost all women, were not taking papers as we could see in America. And African American slaves were not taking papers. That would seem to bring down the literacy rate.
Yeah, oh yeah, it would be less than half of the people in Virginia.
That would bring the literacy rate down to closer to 20%.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Your math is good. Yeah. Yes. Yes. No, it wouldn't have been founded with, I mean, they would have founded a university because of this impetus. So, University of North Carolina and the University of South Carolina are older than UVA. So there are many people who believe that UVA is the first public university, and it's not. It's not even the first in the South. But I believe that the same impetus that led to the creation of UNC and the University of Georgia and the University of South Carolina would lead people in Virginia to create a university. But the particular university that they created is Jefferson's University. Yeah. Right. Well, I have the antidote for your discouragement, which is an essay I wrote about a man named Jedediah Peck. And Jedediah Peck's also a character in this book that I wrote that John Coombs mentioned, William Cooperstown. And he is just a common farmer in upstate New York, originally from Connecticut. So he's got a grammar school education. He values education. And he's troubled that the state of New York has no comprehensive public education system, and he's the primary legislator that pushed it through. And he does this in 1813. So the Virginia story is not the national story. And indeed, North Carolina will push ahead in having a public educational system that's a lot broader than Virginia's before Virginia does. In general, the South lags behind, particularly if some idea gets associated with the Yankees of the North, then there's a kind of resistance to it, which becomes a problem that's difficult to get over. But the story in Virginia is probably a particularly discouraging one because we have such an eloquent, brilliant man as Thomas Jefferson, who has in many ways an enormous clout, and even he couldn't get what he wanted. And I guess the fundamental irony is that these people who create the Republic in Virginia feel that to keep a Republic in Virginia, you need a better educated citizenry. But the people who are already the citizens decide they're educated enough and they don't want to pay money for a better education for more people in the future. And that's the rub. It's not because aristocrats have interfered or demagogues. It's because the citizens, when they're forced to when they make a choice, would prefer to keep the money in their pockets. Yes, John.
To what extent do you, I was kind of listening to the conversation that occurred to me, the course that the university took. To what extent would you say see that as reflective of the general conservative reaction to the American Revolution? Like the back of the repeal of partial alienation.
Yeah, yeah.
All, I mean, because you got like somebody like John Randolph Rowan who's saying, it started as political production. I'm sure.
Right here in Prince Edward County.
And as a Jeffersonian,
Yeah.
but then he says that Jefferson never said anything that was worth listening to other than his ruminations on the cloud by the end of his career.
Right. Well, he also called him Thomas of Canterbury because he thought it was all cant, Jefferson's talk about democracy. Virginia's a complex place. It's always been a complex place. And there are different strands of conservatism. John Randolph's at one extreme. Thomas Jefferson, you could say, is a kind of, in a way, a conservative in many ways when we get into the 18 teens. The whole Missouri thing drives him nuts. Jefferson falls in love with certain Baroque ideas. And he has this particularly complex idea about how the American Union should work. That every state should be absolutely equal to every other state, no matter how small it is or how big or where it's located. And that there can be no interference in the domestic affairs of any state. That is absolutely essential for defense. And that is contrary to an emerging majoritarian democratic idea that's emerging mostly in the northern states, which is the country has a majority, the majority ought to have the say in things and could do things like prevent a slave state from coming into the Union. And that drives Jefferson nuts. So there are ways in which Jefferson is, you could say, is withdrawing, saying what matters most to me is the sovereignty of Virginia. That's more important than anything that might restrict the expansion of slavery. And you're right, there is a general retrenchment. There's a retrenchment in Virginia that takes different forms, but is a general, there's almost, if you read the newspapers or the correspondence of these leading guys in Virginia at this time, they are so in love with Virginia. It's like Virginia's the ideal society on earth. They're so proud of their hospitality, and they just think that Northerners are these cold people who are given to fanaticism, and that their ideas have to be kept at bay. And Jefferson ends up playing ball with that. Yeah.
So today we have an idea, a pretty clear idea about public university, state charter, affiliated, state support, secular,
Not much state support.
state support. Is that essentially what Jefferson had in mind with public university, or is it more inclusive, or is it more nuanced? Do you have other different ideas about what it actually means to be public university?
Well, what it meant for him is that the public would build the buildings, pay for the buildings. After that, the legislators make it quite clear that the operating budget had to come out of tuition charged to the students. There were absolutely no scholarships at UVA in its early years. It's pay as you go. And it's the most expensive university or college in the country. So it's the state government doesn't subsidize education at all. There's no preferential pricing where in-state students get a lower tuition than out-of-state students. Just about all of them were Virginians. The few that were out-of-state usually came from another southern state. Same price fits all. The government of Virginia appoints the Board of Visitors. So that's the level at which it's a public university. And it's understood that in some conceptual way that the state owns the university. So the state, the Virginians at that time, they were not Daniel Webster, so they believed that charters could be revoked by the state government and rewritten. So the state owns the charter of the university and can remake it if it chooses to remake it in the future. And Jefferson always wanted the legislative body of the state to have this power and not to be impeded by decisions made in a previous generation. So that's the sense in which it's a public university. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's no education at schools.
Would he have objected if in 20 years the people had said, no, and we actually want to study theology at University of Virginia, or we want there to be, we want a particular kind of things. We don't want strange new geological and biological ideas taught at university. We want to stick to creation,
Mm-hmm.
something like that. Or because at the same time, I think
Mm-hmm.
Jefferson as very, as you describe it somewhat, not as very radical secular guy.
Mm-hmm.
But if he's giving the power of what people are going to learn to the voting populace regardless, that could lead in another direction, which I assume would exist.
Well, he's not anticipating that there's going to be some mass democratic movement that's going to change the curriculum at the University of Virginia. What he does anticipate is that over the generations, voters will have different priorities. They'll elect legislators that may have different priorities. And those legislators will have influence over the selection through the governor of the Board of Visitors, because at that time the legislature chose the governor. So it's very indirect. There are layers that insulate any kind of direct democratic interference in what Jefferson has mandated will be the curriculum at the University of Virginia. So if you're looking for consistency in Thomas Jefferson, you'll look for a very long time. Okay? Now that doesn't mean that all his ideas are fraudulent. It just means that Jefferson holds conflicting ideas with an intense devotion. So there is an abstract level in which he wants society to become more democratic. And then there's the actual world where he's creating a university where he thinks what will be best for the people will be the kind of curriculum that would be an ideal Thomas Jefferson curriculum that he wanted as a student, that in fact demands more than any other living human being could do, and demanded more than most of the faculty members. He hires these people that are professor of chemistry, and then he wants them also to be teaching physics. You know, people ask me how the university is different. Well, you know, there were like 9 faculty members in Jefferson's day, and he expects them to teach all of human knowledge, which is a very Jeffersonian thing to do. So he thinks he's created a kind of bubble that will be powerful and will educate the elite of Virginia, who will then be chosen by the voters of Virginia on into the future, and they will keep this bubble going.
I'm just wondering, so you mentioned at the beginning that Jefferson was all against monarchy,
Mhm.
right? And it seems like organized public education is a monarchy. Do we have anything or to kind of help square that?
Well, I would need an example from you of a monarchy that was supporting a public education system.
In England, we have Oxford and Cambridge.
Okay, they're not public schools in an American sense. There are a lot of private universities, and some of them have Crown support. Okay? But they are not for educating all of the people of the country. They're very elitist institutions. To this day, just about all the people who are prime ministers or in the top government of Britain either went to Oxford or Cambridge. So there's a kind of elitism in Britain that is funneled through those 2 universities, even though only a very small subset of British people go to those 2 particular universities. So there's a very deep tradition of higher education in Britain, which is associated, yes, with this very elitist social structure. It's different from what these people in the early republic were proposing, which is a more mass education in which more people will have a chance. But then Jefferson, when he's obliged to retrench, chooses the element that in some ways makes his system more like Oxford and Cambridge. Yeah.
Do you have anything to talk about that or not?
Well, he thinks that Oxford and Cambridge are still dominated by the Anglican tradition, and they're not as committed to science as what he believes he has mandated at the University of Virginia. But most of the faculty members that he chooses for the first faculty at UVA are from Oxford and Cambridge.